Watching all this very closely, Stephen, this is kind of a lot of your political lineage was in this particular area, wasn't it? What do you make of the deal yesterday?
Well, it's quite interesting. People in Northern Ireland who've spoken to me this morning are not calling it sort of, the Windsor framework. They're calling it the Windsor Knot, because it's not as good as it seems.
Really?
Well, I'll tell you why. You know the old thing about, today they're ringing the bells, tomorrow they'll be ringing their hands. But if you actually have a look at the command paper, page 23, paragraph 62, which actually describes the so-called Stormont break. I mean, what a magnificently rich, over-sugared fudge this really is. For the so-called Stormont break, which is actually given out as if it was somehow as a way for Stormont, for the people of Northern Ireland, to actually halt anything which is in any way not working properly. For what happens is 30 MLAs, members of the Stormont Assembly, assuming that the Stormont Assembly is ever going to be up and running again, from two different parties, have to make an application to the British government, who then contact the European Union, who then contact an independent arbitrator. And it says in the paragraph 62 that this mustn't be triggered for any trivial reason. Well, anyone...
That's entirely subjective.
Well, absolutely and totally. I mean, the interesting thing about the Command 806 paper is it's very, very political. It's full of non-civil service words like our precious union. It's a very, very political document. And a lot of it is actually hoping for the best, and but not actually preparing for the worst.
Because that's that Stormont break. They've described it as restoring a democratic deficit. Mm-hmm. But in your opinion, it doesn't go anywhere near.
Well, hang on a second. There is a major democratic deficit at the present time. Stormont, the Assembly, is not working. We've got direct rule from Westminster, which in some cases, some members of the Unionist perspective actually like that, because it implies that they really are locked into GB and sort of UK generally. Yeah. But look, if Stormont reassembles as a result of this, then it is a Windsor win.
Yeah, it is.
If it doesn't, then I have to say it's a Windsor not.
But what happens then? That was what I was kind of pressing Dr. John Coulter on, because what does that mean for Stormont, for the Assembly, for the people of Northern Ireland? What does it mean for Rishi Sunak? What does it mean for the deal? He can't go back and renegotiate.
Well, no, of course you can't.
It's done.
I think there's a whole range of very interesting undercurrents here. I mean, this actually goes back to COP22, this back to Dubai, the talk started. And these were very, very much, very off-the-record talks. And oddly enough, apparently Minister Sikovic got on very well with Cleverly, our foreign minister, over a shared love of Westminster, which
is that right?
Well, apparently they used to sit and watch this together. They actually got... Well, isn't it interesting how often in politics personality can be a negative, but it can also be a positive? And I think when I heard Ursula von der Leyen yesterday talking about Rishi, dear Rishi, I thought, hello, what's going on here?
Well, I mean, all credit to him, you might say, if he's managed to win her over with his... oddly robotic personality, then all credit to him. If she's fallen for it and it's in the best interest of this country, then great.
Rishi Sunak is a managerialist. He's a manager. He's not going to give us great oratory. He's not going to lead us to the sun of uplands. But he is a manager, and I think this is a technocratic proposal. Whether it's a technocratic solution, I don't know. This is actually based on what happens in Norway and Sweden, which is the only other EU country with a land border with a non-EU country. And what happens there is you have these green and red lanes. But on the other hand, the population up there is minute, and the thing actually closes at 10 o'clock at night. So it's a very limited process. But, I mean, to describe this as Professor Coulter did, as, Sunak's soggy sausage, I mean, it's a bit... I mean, I'm a great fan. I'm not unfamiliar with the Cookstown sausage, which is one of those brilliant baggers the world will ever known. But I see that cooked meats are actually specifically excluded from the prohibition on here. So there's a lot of detailed stuff in it. Right. But ultimately, it addresses very much the east-west trade. In other words, what's coming from GB into Northern Ireland. Doesn't actually say much about what's going south-north. So something from the European Union comes into Ireland, and does it then cross into Northern Ireland without any checks? Because if there are checks, then they've got to be a hard border.
Do you think it's just Northern Ireland protocol fatigue which has persuaded all of the media this morning to greet this as a celebration? Is it just that the editors of the Mail and the Times, the Express, the Sun, the Star, the Guardian, the Metro, everybody's just saying, we need to move on, because they've all got behind him?
That's very, very perceptive comment, actually. And I think that protocol fatigue is an expression which I will steal, because it's absolutely brilliant. But this reminds me of Churchill's famous comment at the end of the war, when he said, as the tides of war receded, once again we saw emerging the dreary steeples of Fermanagh. It hadn't gone away, it's still there. And I know that most people in British government actually wish they had nothing to do with the situation. I mean, so Asquith in 1914 said the most marvellous thing about the First World War is it enabled him to do what he'd always wanted to do about Ireland, which was nothing.